teams from last year, if you're interested in watching them, it's very interesting to watch. So without further ado, I hand it off to the team.
Great, thank you. Can you guys hear me all right? All right, great. So we actually have a very short period of time this afternoon because of all the great questions that you guys have had. So we're going to do this the very quick way. Call it the Cliff Notes version of the case interview. But of course, afterwards, we'd be happy to answer any other questions you have, or feel free to email us if you have more questions about the case interview process. So case interview is very different from any other type of interview that you ever had or ever will have. Instead of asking about, tell us a time where you demonstrated moral courage or leadership, we're really trying to see how you think through a problem. And it'll be a problem that was faced by one of our project teams in working with a client. So it's to kind of get that feel and simulate what would it be like to be working with this person on a day-to-day basis on an actual client project. So very quickly talk through the overall approach, how to master the case interview, so to speak. We'll go very briefly through a sample case just so you can see what the flavor of a case interview, and then give you some final tips and questions. I don't think we'll have time for real breakout sessions and discussions. Okay. So any questions before I get moving? All right. So how it works overall how it fits in with the overall interview process is, so first you submit your resumes, cover letters, apply in the two places, one through Career Services, one on our website, setting up your profile, and then in your first round, if you are selected for an interview, you'll have two interviews. One is a behavioral interview, which is a very traditional sort of getting to know you, understanding how your experience is relevant to Deloitte and the kind of work that we do, and then the case interview. Now, if you make it through that round and are asked back the next day for the second round, it's just a case, and it's a much longer case. Instead of being one-on-one, you'll have a couple interviewers sitting there with you and asking you questions or answering the questions that you ask, and then the offers are extended. So, mastering the case interview. Basically, and I've touched on this very briefly already, what it is, more than anything else, is you being presented with a problem and walking us through how you would approach that problem. It's not, like the young lady was saying before, it's not just pitching the answer and saying this is what it is. It's saying, okay, let me understand what the problem is, ask clarifying questions, walk through why it is that you're asking the questions that you're asking, how it is that you would develop a solution to that particular problem, and then presenting that. So you go from the kind of understanding, clarifying what the issue is, to the actual kind of core analysis, and then into more of a presentation mode, where you are clearly and concisely explaining what your recommendation is, and you should come to a recommendation and why. There's also no right or wrong answer. It's not like there's a real script that we're looking at and saying, did they say these words? No, we're looking at characteristics that you're demonstrating in talking through a case interview. It's very important to state the assumptions that you're making, and basically look at it as a little intellectual walk through the park with whoever you're interviewing. You're helping them understand how you think and why you think in that particular way. So the 5 critical skills that we're looking for are your ability to identify a problem, to actually do that kind of core analysis, ask the right questions. It's not asking tons of questions, it's asking a few of the right questions to fill in any gaps in the particular case that you're presented. It's looking at how you communicate, how you're asking those questions, how you are talking through whatever framework you may be using in order to approach that problem, and how you're delivering your recommendation. Because that's what we do day to day, is sitting with our clients or standing in front of them and presenting, talking through our analysis and why we got to a particular recommendation or set of recommendations, and why. The 4th skill is seeing your logical thought process. We don't want to see very unstructured, all over the map sort of thinking. We want to see that you're following a very disciplined way of approaching that particular problem. Instead of talking about everything potentially relevant to the case, we want to see what you're really narrowing in on and see that you're doing it in a very logical fashion. And then finally, we realize it's a very big ask in the interview. It's going to be a complex problem. It's based on a real situation that was likely a 3, 6, 9-month engagement. It may have been a year or more. So you can't possibly cover everything related to that case. So we're testing how you are with uncertainty and seeing how comfortable you are with that uncertainty in a very high pressure situation and a very complex issue. So overall approach, this is our rough 4-step approach that you should keep in mind as you're going through the case. The first step is actually identifying what is the problem, what is it that they're asking. You'd be surprised at how many people actually come to the case interview and talk about something that's not actually related to what the main question is that the case is asking you to think through. The second is thinking logically. The third is actually analyzing whatever data you have in front of you, and where you don't have enough, getting more information from your interviewer by asking clarifying questions. And then finally, when you get into that communications mode where you're delivering your recommendation, communicating what your action plan is and how it is that you arrived at that particular recommendation or action plan. So I'll briefly walk through each of these in a little more detail. One thing that I would say, just a tip, as soon as you hear what I'll call the prompt for the case interview, say this is the particular solution, this context, how would you do X, or what would you do here and why? You don't need to immediately start talking. You can pause, collect your thoughts, you write down a couple thoughts, a couple questions you might want to ask, clarify with your interviewer, and then keep going. It doesn't have to be immediately that you have a solution. I wouldn't say sit there for 20 minutes in silent scribbling on your pad, but you'll find the balance there. Question?
Yes, I was just going to ask, how much of this is qualitative versus quantitative in the problem?
The problem itself or the evaluation?
The problem itself, the issue.
So there are quantitative cases. I would say historically we haven't had very quantitative heavy cases. We're more interested in how you approach a problem. We're not looking for a business case in the interview.
But sometimes it'll be something like you have to do ballpark numbers on, all right, they want a 10% reduction over 5 years so there are some times where you're going to have to loosely crunch numbers. With our analyst cases, we tend to, so our undergraduate recruiting, we tend to have a little bit more quant heavy because that skill set is a little bit more of a requirement for the analyst level than the consultant level, I would say, just based on my experience with going through both recruiting processes. I don't know if you have
I would say also in the interview process with the cases, we don't allow calculators, so that just gives you an idea that it's not very, very heavy where you need assistance.
But don't panic when you see numbers. Usually there's a logical 10%, all right, I can deal with 10%. Like, you usually just relax and think through, there's an easy way to do this, because again, I wasn't required to bring a calculator.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And Sam was right. I mean, the intent of the exercise is to get some assessment as to your logical reasoning, how you think through. It's more about, it's much, much more about the how than it is the solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually pretty much exclusive.
Yeah.
Okay. Step 2, not to beat the dead horse, but ask clarifying questions. There's something that's missing. And it would probably be helpful to explain why it is that you're asking that particular clarifying question. At this point, you should also be looking at how you want to structure your approach to that particular problem. You can use what I'll call a CAN framework, but you don't have to. You can still be logical and not use a very recognized framework like Porter's 5 forces or a straight SWOT analysis. It doesn't have to be something that formal, but it could be if that's helpful to you. And these are some examples: cost model, SWOT, 4 Cs. So if you are already comfortable with these frameworks and think it will be useful, do it. Would I say study CAN frameworks to help you with a case interview? Probably not.
Yeah, can I add one other one that you might want to think about doing is when you're looking at the problem, look at it from the people dimension, like the org dimension, the process is a business process issue, and the technology dimension as well. It's just a fourth one that you may want to think about in sort of framing your solution.
Yeah, that's a great example because I think it's more often used than any
I
of
would
these.
think so, yeah.
And you'll see that framework is very loose. It's
Yeah.
more making sure that you're not missing a piece of the problem. Okay. And then analyze the data. So if you're going to use a framework, pick your framework and go with it. Explain the framework that you're using. If you're not using a framework, explain the approach and what pieces of your recommendation or what analysis you're doing in support of that recommendation. And then finally, it's communicating your recommendation. And it should be a relatively robust recommendation as a result of what you just said. I would recommend, this option because of these reasons. Here's some concerns you may have and how you may mitigate those risks associated with this particular problem or manage those risks associated with the problem. And I would also say if you do get challenged on what your recommendation is, if there's a follow-up question, it's fine. That's expected. It's part of the process. Think of it as more back and forth than you just preaching at whoever's your interviewer. It's a conversation. So if they're asking you to clarify, it may be that they want to see how you think through a particular aspect of the problem, what you have to say there. And more likely than not, they're actually trying to help. All right, sample case.
So for the sake of time, we're going to do this one really quickly. I'll read through it, but we're not going to do the breakout where you actually try to solve the case. But we'll go through it just so you can get a look at what type of case you'll be doing. One thing I highly recommend is that you do some practice cases before you actually come into the interview, because it is something totally different than most people have ever experienced. And one thing I've noticed as an interviewer is the biggest problem I see with people is not that they can't solve the case, it's that they panic. I've had a couple people like sweating and is so nervous and don't know how to answer it. And it's like, I just want to tell them, like, calm down, take a deep breath. It's not a big deal. Just talk to me. We're just two people in a room. Talk to me about how you would approach this problem. So I would definitely do some practices to make sure you're okay with that. Okay, so in the interview, we will sit down. Traditionally, it'll be 30 minutes. We'll do an introduction scenario where the interviewer will read to you the case, and then you do the actual case analysis, where you have 20 minutes for you to come up with your answer. At the end of that, make sure there's time for conclusion and wrap up. So you also want to know kind of how it went and find out a little bit. So make sure you go through the conclusion and wrap up. So you'll be given a scenario and asked a series of questions about a problem facing a public sector organization. The questions are designed to determine your ability to articulate and analyze complex business problems. The interviewer will assess the depth and creativity of your answers and how well you support your conclusion. There's no right or wrong answer. A successful answer isn't necessarily whether it's the right strategy, but it's how you describe it and support your case, like Sam was saying. So here we go, diving into it. So in the actual interview, they'll read you something like that tells you what's going on. And then here's our business situation. A National Labor and Population Statistics Agency conducts a survey every 10 years that collects data on every household in the country. This data is used for congressional apportionment and funds allocation to state and local governments. Recently, this agency's budget has been reduced, but its operational costs have skyrocketed year over year. The agency, so here's some key considerations for you to take into account. The agency has been proactively looking for ways to gain control of its costs while maintaining the same high quality of data collected. There is a tremendous amount of oversight and pressure to improve the way the agency does business. However, the agency is extremely risk averse as its activities are highly consequential. Any changes made within the agency need to be fail-safe. So oftentimes when you read your case, you need to really pay attention to these key considerations. These are the red flags in here telling you these are the things that you need to be taking into account. So the next thing is usually we would ask you to present the problem. Does anyone want to take a stab at presenting presenting the problem statement here? You don't have to. Okay, moving on.
Oh, wait, no.
Oh, we have one. Sorry, I was a little fast there.
I'll go first.
Okay.
The problem is that the agency still needs to maintain a high level of data collection, but they also need to reduce the costs.
That's great. And do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we're trying to identify kind of cost drivers here for their fiscal outlook.
Great, okay. See how we stated it. The agency has hired Deloitte Consulting to analyze its business strategy and operations to determine the cause of these increasing costs and to develop comprehensive recommendations for improvement. So questions for the interviewee. So at this point, we tell you the questions you need to answer at the end of your 20 minutes. So what additional information do you need? So we're admitting right here, you don't have all the information. What steps would you like to try to take to address the cost drivers? And what key recommendations would you give to address the problem? So one thing to note, oftentimes your interviewer has additional information that we don't read you in that initial problem statement. So you need to ask us probing questions so that we give you that information. So as you think through what the answers to these questions, you need to, as Sam said, first take a deep breath, figure out what's going on here, ask clarifying questions to make sure you're on the right path. Make sure that as you look at that 20 minutes, you have 3 questions to answer. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 4. Make sure that you have time allotted to solve each of those because you need to spend time on each one. And then ask probing questions. So here we have some additional information that we could provide you if you ask. So through client interviews, you're provided with several additional pieces of valuable information. Survey methodology has not changed significantly since 1970. I'm going to do this kind of quickly for the sake of time. On average, up to 6 in-person attempts are made to contact each household. The internet has not been widely used due to security and privacy concerns. So right here, these additional questions are going to help you frame your answer because they're going to provide more constraints on what the solution can be. So now let's use the sample approach that Sam just went over. So step 1, identify the problem. Determine the scope of the problem. Is it strategy, operational efficiency, business process, technology? Is it a combination of those factors? What's going on here? Summarize the issue and validate the agency's goal. So what we just did there, we summarized what the problem statement was. Here, an operating model that helps regain cost control of survey activities by managing the cost per unit. Then you want to ask, as we said before, ask clarification and additional information. Step 2, think logically. So we want to see how you think. So show us that you can approach a problem in a calm, logical manner. So organize your thoughts with a SWOT analysis. Consider the survey methodology and why it hasn't changed in the last 40 years. Identify labor as the common thread of cost drivers, and focus on cost per housing unit / cost drivers. Again, you don't have to use a SWOT analysis. You can be completely logical using your own sort of framework. The frameworks are more to help you if it's something you feel comfortable using. Step 3, analyze the data. So make key observations. Paper responses, non-response follow-up data is not digitized. The internet is a major opportunity for reducing labor digitization. So those are some of your analyzing questions or observations. Then communicate an action plan and answer. Identify a new vision, short and long-term initiatives to implement this new vision. Recommend restructuring the workforce to reduce labor needs. Recommend implementing technology improvements such as internet, mobile devices in the field. But when you make those recommendations, note, because you heard one of the caveats was due to privacy and concerns, they didn't want to go that route. So that should be something you say. We realize that this is a constraint, however, there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of resources out there, the federal government uses these, and there's ways to make it a secure environment. So that's one of the things that you want to highlight there. And then support your recommendations with cost calculations. Here, we didn't ask you to do that. Sometimes we'll actually ask you to come up with some loose numbers around how much you think you'll save. So question 1, what additional information do you need? So a good answer, request information to understand how demographic changes between 70 and 2010 affect costs. A great answer, a more robust answer, is request information to understand changes in population density, social culture since 1970, the potential for cost reduction related to technology. So question 2, what step would you take to address the cost drivers? So good answer, as a key cost factor is related to labor, assessing growth rate of employees' payroll. Great answer, introducing internet, thereby reducing at least one of the 4 major cost factors, minimizing demands on local and regional labor, minimizing redundancy. So here, I'm not going to read through all of these, but as you look, you can see a good answer, which is going to get you a good, pretty far along the way, is to show that. But again, we want to know your thought process. So the great answer is just showing that you've thought through more aspects of the issue than just the core answer. So then final tips. Am I doing these or?
We can all do them.
Well, I'll do final tips. So relax. I can't say enough how important relaxing is. It doesn't have to be a hostile environment. I know a lot of people get so scared about cases and you go in there all amped up, and just relax, just have fun with it. Just realize that this is an opportunity, like a behavioral interview, to interact with somebody and to show how you think in a different way. So that's one main one. I like what Sam said before about composing your thoughts. Oftentimes people jump right in, and you need to think. You need to step back and think, what's the problem? What am I being asked to do? And make sure you ask those clarifying questions. Because I did have an interview once where the person didn't really tell me the direction they were going. They were largely quiet for the 20 minutes. I tried interjecting a few times to see what was going on, and they went way off on a tangent. And it's one of those things where you need to ask those questions, because we as the interviewer will help you stay on track. So you want to make sure you ask the right questions to keep you on track. You want to do a couple more? All right, think outside the box is okay. So again, you don't have to use a canned response. You can kind of bring whatever response, at whatever approach. I do think people process technology is really important though, because it's oftentimes any issue you're confronted with are going to have those components, and it's important to show that you understand that no issue is one-dimensional. There's going to be a lot of facets.
And then often the other piece of that is policy.
Yeah.
People process technology and policy.
And then paper and pencil is key. You're going to want to take notes and write down. Expect to be challenged. That's key. We will ask you questions. Even if you're on the right track, we're going to ask you questions on why you're going that path, because we want to understand, is this a guess, or do you actually understand the underlying reasons why, or you kind of understand a glimpse into your mind and how you're approaching it. And practice. They're different, and most people have never had anything like this.
One resource that's available to go along with practice on our website, careers.deloitte.com, if you go into the search function and put mock case interview or case prep, there is a specific MPA case, because it's going to definitely be different than a general management case. There is a practice case on our site, and I'll walk you through the case and how to tackle it.
And definitely, it'll be different than a commercial one as well. So as you start to practice, some of the commercial ones are very quant heavy, and so make sure that you look for qualitative type questions that we do. Things to do: listen to your interviewer, take your time, be sure you understand what's going on. And these are all things we've already touched on. Ask questions, develop an approach and a hypothesis, and make sure you bounce what's going on off of your interview. Don't just sit there and write for 20 minutes. Show what you're thinking, show your thought process, and put some caveats in there. And like I was saying before with that email thing, make sure that you note that security is a concern here. However, I think we could get around that. Make sure you talk through that. And then make sure you've answered all the questions when you get there. And again, the answer isn't what matters, but we want to make sure that you're able to take this 20 minutes and do the most with that time.
Yep. Be calm.
Yeah.
Be clear. Be structured. Be thoughtful. Be concise.
So these are pretty much what we've already said.
We promise we don't turn up the temperature in the room. We don't make the lights brighter. We maybe make them flicker. No, it's the interviewer is there to help you and help understand what your thought process is. So relax.
I want to echo that. I mean, I know we talk about don't stress. Guarantee you will stress. There's time pressure. You'll stress. Do all the to-dos, but also know that the interviewer, or if you get to day 2, the interviewer is like, Sarah and I've done this many years. We want everyone to be successful. So there's no good cop, bad cop in this. We'll have some fun at the case challenge and role play. In the interview process, we do not want to be the reading you don't do well. So know, if you can eliminate one stressor walking in there, I can say this from a guy who's probably be doing a case interview with you. We want you to be successful. We really, really do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's sometimes if you do the behavioral interview and then someone else does the case and you find out they didn't do well in the case, you're like, no, but they were great. So we definitely are pulling for you guys, especially when we come to Maxwell. We love this school, and there's so many people from Maxwell that have come to Deloitte and had such incredible careers that we know that what you're learning here is so valuable to our practice that we really want to make sure some of you join the firm next year. So, questions?
Yeah, you may reiterate, I guess, what you said earlier, but I just had a question. So I've had some experience with case interviews and stuff. So like with the key information things that like raise red flags, so for this one it was the internet thing. Is the thought that as long as I have good backup and support for that assertion or what that solution is it okay to go against that? So like, obviously the going for online and survey and stuff would be a good way to lower costs in that scenario, but we were given the key information that it was, we were worried about security. And so as long as we have good support, is it okay to go against those? Because, we obviously don't want to recommend things that are bad, but if we have good support.
Absolutely, unless they say, like, internet is not an option. Like, if it's something that clear, then I would back away from it. But if it's anything like this, I think as long as you explain why you think it's important and explain how you would approach it to make sure that you mitigate whatever risks there are, I think that you should absolutely think outside the box.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think one other point with the solution is we talked about assumptions. Make sure your assumptions are reasonable. State them up front, make them reasonable. You can't assume away the problem, so you can't walk in and assume that I've got as many years as I need to do the project and I'm in the budget. It's probably not going to win you many points, but reasonable assumptions are good. In fact, you're going to need them. I would say if you don't have assumptions, because you're not going to have all the information as you can see in the case, so make reasonable assumptions.
And state
tell
them.
us. Yeah, because like what he was just saying,
Yeah.
you might come in and say, I assume that I have unlimited budget and unlimited time. And that's where your interviewer would go, well, you assume wrong, and set you on the right path. Yeah.
Just a cadence.
Please go.
Oh, sorry. It's just a cadence question. So you said during the 20-minute period, the interviewer is in the room with you, and it's sort of just active the whole time.
30.
I know that sometimes the interviewer steps out and you get a bunch of material.
No.
This
No.
is the structure.
Yeah, we're with you the whole time.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Watching you. Again, don't stress.
Yeah, there are no lifelines, so we don't leave the room. You can't call mom. So.
I'm out.
Anything else?
Any other questions?
I will make a point of clarification that came up during the break. The case challenge is not part of the interview process, and you are not being evaluated for the interview process. It's a totally separate event. It's good. It's a good time to practice.
Yeah, and I mentioned this to a couple people earlier. We usually mention this early on, is that as you're doing those events, I think the case challenge is a particularly good one because there'll be a bunch of us here for a number of days. Use that as an opportunity to kind of get to know us and get to know the firm, because really the people who are here today and the people who are going to be there, during the case challenge are likely people you're going to be working with or very similar. We're not clones, but our culture, we all really embody, I think, the culture very well. So, and this goes with, regardless of what firm you interview with, get to know the firm and the people very, very well. And because as much as we are interviewing, it seems kind of one way at times, it's really a bilateral transaction here. You're selecting us as well. So make sure it's a place you're going to be comfortable working and a culture you're comfortable with.
Yeah.